All right. Today, there's an interesting question on Blind, where somebody has asked, what are the three pitfalls to avoid in order to ensure career progression, especially in a software engineering career? Now, this is a very subjective matter, so answers will vary. I've got my own thoughts on this. I've got three things that I think that you need to avoid if you want to continue progressing. For what it's worth, I'm currently a staff engineer at DoorDash, so doing reasonably well for myself. And I follow these three principles throughout my career. So the first one for me is I think you need to avoid. You must be intentional in your career. So you need to be somewhat intentional about your career decisions in order to progress over the course of several years. I think it's totally fine to be opportunistic, to grab roles as they come up in teams and projects and so on. But it sure does help to have an idea of what you want to work on and treat each project or role or company as a building block to something more. I know that not all of us are lucky enough to have graduated from a top program or done internships at top companies and so on. So sometimes it takes several steps before you get to what you want to do. And so what does it mean to be intentional? I think some examples are thinking about which tech sectors or companies you want to work for, where in the world you want to work, what types of roles suit your interests and your strengths, what technologies you want to develop expertise in, and which projects, once you're in the role, which projects you put your hand up for and so on. It's really difficult to make much career growth if every year you're hopping from, being a back-end engineer to a front-end engineer to mobile and so on. It really takes some time to build up. And so it's useful to be intentional about where you're heading. So that's my first tip. Is one pitfall is not being intentional with your career. The second pitfall I really believe in is to assume that technical skills are enough. So a lot of newer engineers really have this sense that they just need to write good code and they'll naturally progress in their careers. And I think they've probably just been lucky enough not to have seen a project or a feature fail for reasons that are completely unrelated to technical skills. Everything from poor understanding of user requirements, under-resourcing, resourcing with the wrong skills, poor planning, miscommunication nightmares across teams and so on. There's a whole range of these soft skills that will cause your career to at least, not rocket at the pace that you might want it to. And so many times, so long as your technical skills are good enough, your progression really depends on soft skills, like the ability to collaborate with other teams, manage project timelines, communicate with users and stakeholders. And yes, unfortunately, sometimes even office politics. So I think you just have to acknowledge that reality. And I think even for really deeply technical roles, some element of this still exists at the highest levels. So I would definitely only ignore these non-technical skills at your own risk. And lastly, I think for me, the tip is being overly impatient. So this is a tough one because it's purely a judgment call and there's often not a clear answer on when to make a change. But I'm talking about, when do you decide to switch anything from whether it's a technology that you're working on to changing teams within a company, roles, companies, or even industries, right? If you switch too soon, you risk doing so before you develop any real expertise in the area. Or at least before you get recognized as being an expert in an area. And I've always kind of considered, as a rule of thumb, if you're spending less than a year on a technology or team or company, you're unlikely to have built up the real expertise or to be considered for promotions. I mean, you probably could change jobs under a year a few times, especially early in your career. But I've been on hiring panels where, if you're doing this too frequently and you're, a bit more of a senior engineer, it starts to be a question mark or a red flag. So I would keep that minimal. And then on the other extreme, I think if you're taking too long to make a switch, you kind of risk stagnation. So if you're spending, 5-10 years in a particular technology or company, you'd better be sure that this is what you want to spend your time working on, because it may be a little more difficult for you to get used to working on the next new thing. Anyway, so that's my opinion. So what are three pitfalls to avoid for progression in a software engineering career? I would say not being intentional on your career choices. 2 is assuming technical skills are enough. And 3rd is being overly impatient. Good luck.